Hey, it's Rebecca. Welcome to the Brainy Blonde podcast. I don't know if it's just me, but every time I open up social media, I read something about cortisol spikes and the dangers of high cortisol. Cortisol is our body's stress hormone, which means it plays a role in maintaining pretty much everything: blood pressure, blood glucose levels, and immune function. Immune function, as in our body's natural defense system against everyday viruses and bigger threats like cancer. And I don't know about you guys, but there's nothing that sends me quicker into fight or flight than thinking about doing something that might be reducing my body's resistance to cancer. So, how exactly are we supposed to not get super stressed out about, well, getting stressed out? Today, I'm talking with someone who's going to help us do just that. Natalie Samson is the founder of Golden Genetics. She is a genetic counselor who not only helps determine your inherited risk for diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, but she's an expert in a new field called nutrigenomics. And that's just a fancy term for figuring out your body's unique biological system through genetic testing in order to help you understand how best to adjust your lifestyle, nutrition, movement, supplements, and even to determine which medical interventions may or may not be the most effective for you. I know it might sound really scary to uncover the secrets of your body's genetics, but trust me, when you listen to Natalie, you're going to realize it's quite the opposite. Because you're probably already concerned about cancer. And maybe it's because you have a family history, or maybe it's just because you're just reading about it in the news every single day. And if you're not doing anything about it, but stewing or just trying to avoid thinking about it, I promise you're going to feel so much better after listening to my expert today. Natalie, I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to the Brainy Blonde podcast. Why don't you first, for all the people listening, I guess I just really want to say, and I might have already said this to you, but I have to say it again. What you are doing on social media, that's how I first found you. And it just kind of cracks me up that it's Golden Genetics, because you are such a ray of sunshine in what could be otherwise considered sort of like a kind of dark and scary subject. And so I think it's so important. And I love how you present it in such an empowering and positive way. So I'm so excited that you're here. And Natalie, you want to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for saying that too, because that was really my goal of starting the practice. And it's funny you said that, because I named Golden Genetics that way because I wanted people to feel like they felt golden, like shining golden light. So I was like, that's what I was visualizing when I named the practice. So I appreciate that so much. I definitely, the goal was to help people feel empowered about their genetics and not scared. And so I think, that just means so much that you feel that from my marketing efforts and everything. So I am a genetic counselor. So I was traditionally trained to study all things genetics, but also counseling. So genetic counselors have a master's degree in genetics and also psychology. It's mixed in there. So that we're able to communicate, the science piece of the genetics, but able to, communicate that in a way that's understandable and also recognize that genetic information can bring up emotions, like you had said. So we are able to counsel people through those emotions. After graduating, I did actually work in oncology only on a precision medicine team. So we were doing cancer genetic testing. And that's when I felt really, as someone giving risk information to undiagnosed family members, who had a family history of cancer, I felt like there was so much more we could do with the realm of preventative and proactive care. And use genetic information in that way. And so that's why I started my practice, to try to bring that approach into kind of more of a holistic, integrative way, but, still embracing the best of conventional Western medicine, such as screenings, and potential surgeries and all of that as well. So just combining the worlds and trying to help people feel empowered.
Yeah. So I have a family genetic predisposition to cancer. And this is such an interesting topic to me. And my daughter, who's 18, was eligible to be tested. So we had met with her genetic counselor the day we were originally going to record this. So I was like,
oh, that's
ready
so
to go,
funny.
like top of mind, all the things. And I'm like, okay, like this is not my day-to-day job, but I think I have it pretty clear. So
what, do you mind me asking what gene?
Yeah. So I have a MSH6 mutation. So it's Lynch syndrome. I mean, that's why this is so important to me. And because my mom had glioblastoma and then I got it, even though they said it's not genetic. So my mom had glioblastoma 15 years before I did. And then when I got it, I was like, there's got to be a link. And so we found it. My mom's tumor tissue was still in storage. And we found the mutation in the link. So now, of course, having 4 kids, like I'm concerned for them and trying to help them walk that line and navigate that space between feeling empowered and feeling scared. And why I'm so excited to talk to you, because I feel like the reason that I'm kind of here and I'm surviving, I have to feel, instead of survivor's guilt or anything else, like my purpose is to try to connect people to experts like you, because otherwise I don't know why I got to survive this and why I'm okay. But precision medicine is why I'm alive, but also I believe my lifestyle choices and knowing what's going on with my body, with my genetics, my mutations, my other cancer risks are informing the decisions that I make in this next chapter of my life, in my 40s, and the decisions I'm going to make about my body going forward, and in terms of what I eat and what I do. And so I would love for you to kind of talk about how you empower people with knowing their genetic history and risk.
So, I definitely feel like, some people, when they think about understanding if there's a genetic component to their risk to cancer, can feel overwhelmed. But I think, like you said, it holds so much power because it gives us the ability to not only be proactive, and potentially also, if something comes up, catch things early. And as we know, cancer caught early is much different than cancer caught late. But it also gives us the power to be personalized and precise with any treatment, but also just the way that we live life. And so I think that's what's so powerful about understanding our genetics. And so I always tell patients, when I do see a family history, of course, it's their decision whether they want to test or not. So I always review with them what that actually means and what we're even looking for when we're saying cancer testing. But there is that big piece of it that, when we view it as it's information that holds so much power and we can utilize this to our advantage, I think that really helps people understand, how important it can be to clarify.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about what, I don't know if you want to talk specifically or broadly, but what things that you can do with that information that make you feel empowered in terms of lifestyle, nutrition, and of course, preventative measures?
Totally. Yeah. So I actually always like to clarify too what the genes are doing in our bodies that we're uncovering and testing for, because there is kind of a misconception that people think we have the cancer gene or we don't, but that's not actually how it works. So basically inside our bodies, we have certain genes that protect us against cancer. So there's kind of different areas. There's tumor suppressor genes, there's DNA repair genes, there's oncogenes, and these genes play a role in our bodies that protect us against cancer. And so sometimes people are born with a change or a mistake in one of these genes that causes the gene not to work as well. We call that a mutation. And when that gene doesn't work as well, they're at increased risk of cancer because they have less protection against cancer. So it's not 100% you're going to get cancer, but now we know, okay, you have less protection. And so I think I always like to explain that, because then when we view it from that perspective, that's where we can understand, okay, so we can, when individuals test positive, we say have an identified mutation in one of those genes, insurance usually covers extra screening for them. And so the reason that matters is because sometimes people will start screening at a much later age, just general population. Right. But if they're at increased risk, we can start earlier to make sure we catch it early if anything comes up, because they're at that increased risk of early onset. And then the other piece too, I won't go into too much detail, but the way that I counsel on it is, if we know that you have less protection against cancer, how can we support your environment, meaning what you eat, what you're exposed to, what you're doing and taking to support the reduction of cancer even coming up in the first place. And that's where I think combining those two worlds can be so powerful, because of course, we know that cancer is sometimes not 100% preventable, and we can have control over that risk. And for the piece that we don't have control over is where the screenings can come in, so that if something comes up, we catch it early.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I know you said you didn't want to go into too much detail, but I'd love to know, like, if you are at a higher risk for having cancer develop in your body because you don't have the protector genes, if I'm saying that correctly. I like the way you phrase that, because sometimes I think BRCA is like probably the most popular one that everybody knows. Like, I have the breast cancer gene, and you're saying that's not really exactly how it is, right? And I know my daughter just got the testing. She's 18. She got the testing to see if she has the mutation that I have that usually manifests as colon cancer. So that's a really easy one, I think, for people to understand. Like, you normally start getting your colonoscopies, the dreaded colonoscopies, at 45 or 50. And to know that, she would have been eligible to start getting them now. She actually was negative for the mutation, so that was a relief. But it was a really good conversation that we had to talk about, okay, this is empowering. What are we going to be able to do with that information? So the one thing, like you said, is for insurance to cover, for instance, colonoscopies, the most likely way it would show up in your body early on. But when it comes to like the lifestyle suggestions that you make, is that tailored specifically to the mutation or to just cancer prevention broadly?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the way that I like to do it in my practice is that I actually utilize nutrigenomics testing, which is like a whole different world of genetic testing outside of cancer testing.
Okay.
Yes. So I combine both of these tests. So when we're doing cancer testing, so if we identify that there is an increased risk for cancer based on a mutation in those genes, I usually will do a nutrigenomics test. And nutrigenomics is very different than diagnostic or medical high risk testing, I say. So we're not going to tell someone if they're going to have increased screening from nutrigenomics. So they're just different. Okay. But nutrigenomics is really powerful because it can help us understand different biochemical pathways in the body that may need support. So it's not to be too scientific, but we approach it from something called a systems biology approach, which means we're looking at different pathways in the body that can indirectly relate to cancer. So for example, we look at the inflammation pathway. And so if someone has genes that give them a higher chance to have an inflammatory response in the presence of inflammatory triggers, then we know we want to support bringing down the inflammation, because indirectly we know that chronic inflammation can cause, create an environment that's not the best for reducing cancer risk. And so I like to get really personalized with nutrigenomics. But if we don't have nutrigenomics, I will talk about general cancer prevention. And of course, we have to also sometimes just think about the basics, like what's going on with your sleep, what's going on with your stress, what's going on, just general diet. Like, are you eating more whole foods, or are you eating more of a processed food type of diet? So sometimes and how's your activity and movement? So I really feel like I try to meet the patient where they're at first too, but you can also get a lot of power with just, I think stress is it's such a hard one, specifically too, because everyone's like, well, I'm doing all the perfect things, but then they're stressed about doing all the perfect things, and then they have a stressful job. And I'm like, stress is almost one of the biggest ones that we have to kind of get down because of the cortisol. So, I think just even sometimes sticking with the basics when you have a higher risk, and kind of just being gentle with yourself there to start can be helpful.
That's so funny. That's what I was thinking. It's like the worst thing you can do is stress about, stress if you have a high cancer risk, but then of course, getting that information might be stressful. So other than inflammation, like tell me one other pathway or risk This is so fascinating to
Yeah,
me.
yeah. So we look at actually in cancer genetics, it's different, but when we're thinking about nutrigenomics, also known as
Yeah.
lifestyle genomics, it's relatively
Okay.
kind of newer testing. So the terminology behind it is very different, but and kind of scattered right now. But we're testing for many different pathways. So that's why I use lifestyle genomics, because it's not just looking at nutrition. But we're looking at detoxification, oxidative stress, and methylation pathways in the body as well. And then we also will look at things like glucose and insulin, cardiovascular markers, just also, genes that relate to food processing and nutrient processing. And so all of that can be helpful too, because it can kind of clarify like what could be going on in the body outside of your cancer risk. And we know everything is interconnected. So if someone has, a high chance to have high highs and low lows with blood sugar spikes and drops, like we're going to want to help stabilize their blood sugar. But that relates to cancer in a sense too, because it's again all connected in the health of the body.
Yeah. Are you looking at like gut microbiome as well when you're doing this?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because we're still looking at the genetics. So
Okay.
it's yeah, it's basically like what were you born with and have a predisposition for, or might have potential issues with, that's going on in your body. But then I
Okay.
always say it's so powerful to help to combine this testing with blood tests and gut microbiome testing to really clarify and get even more specific. So the best thing is
Wow.
I like to look at it all, if we can. But
Yeah. So you
yeah.
navigate all these aspects and kind of like they're all so interwoven and help because I mean, I feel like so often I'm like, as the patient, I'm out on, on social media, reading books that I'm getting,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
How Not to
Yeah.
Die and Outlive and all these
Yeah.
awesome books,
Yeah.
but it's a lot to integrate in your own mind. Again,
Yeah.
keeping that anxiety level
Yeah.
down, but feeling like
Totally.
I want the information. I want to do the right things,
Yeah.
So is that part of
Yeah.
what you do as a counselor then help people?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, cancer is a big passion of mine because I think that oftentimes you are put to all these different specialties and no one's kind of connecting the dots on what could work for you. And then, we have these, unfortunately, sometimes we have these separated worlds of, nutrition, lifestyle, and then the separated world. So I really like to kind of hope, be the connector in between all of those, and look at it from a whole picture and see, like you said, really be able to personalize what could work for you, because there's new research about everything all the time. There's a new influencer talking about what worked for her, and it's like, and there's so many books, right? Like Outlive and Dr. William Lai. There's amazing books, but it's like you said, it's what's actually going to work for you. And that's why I like to look at like all of your genetics and then blood tests, because that's really where we get to understand what actually works for you.
That's so amazing. What an amazing
Yeah.
resource. And I'm definitely going to like link all your stuff because you talk to
Thank
people
you.
all over the world, right? You can do this remotely.
Well, yeah. So we do, because of licensure. I do have
Oh, okay.
licensure in California, and certain states in the U.S. Other states, it's a little bit with cancer testing. I usually have to connect them with someone I think would be
Okay.
helpful, but I can't see everyone in every state. But I can see people in many states.
Okay. No, that's
So
so good
definitely
to
check
know.
in.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
just to know that you could be a resource or direct people because
yeah,
um, I know, yeah, so many people who listen to this
yeah,
podcast are either
yeah.
facing cancer themselves or they're a caregiver with someone or they know,
Mhm.
they just really want to prevent it from happening
Yeah,
to them because it's
yeah,
obviously scary. And the one thing that you said, which I feel like is top of mind for me because of the brain cancer diagnosis that I have and that a lot of people that are listening have. And you were talking about methylation. And I feel like, is that something
yeah.
you could just talk about a little bit? Because I
Yeah.
think that's a confusing one, especially in this population of listeners.
Oh, yes. Oh, this is like I think there's a lot of misinformation about the topic, and it's very confusing. So, okay. Ultimately, I always like to explain to like where the confusion came from. So, many years ago, the gene MTHFR was identified, and researchers found this gene to be potentially linked to neural tube defects when women were getting pregnant due to lack of folate. And so research was being done on this gene about what else could the variants in this gene lead to. But as research continued on, we've actually figured out that the change in this gene is much more common than we thought, and it may not lead to all these different things. With that being said, methylation is still important. It's just not the MTHFR is not the only gene, and methylation in general, we just have to view it in a different way. And in general, we can support our methylation cycle pretty easily by making sure we're getting methylated B vitamins, methylated folate, and choline. And so when that's the main thing. If people have this in their genetics, I test for the whole methylation pathway, not just MTHFR. And I also will say that in my perspective, as far as the research goes right now, it's not like having a variant in the methylation gene will 100% give you cancer. It's very different than cancer genetic testing, but it helps us clarify what nutrients we may want to support to lower homocysteine levels and support that pathway, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And when we get diagnosed, so often we're told our methylation status is that, and I don't know if that's a tumor thing or a whole body thing. I guess I don't even know that for sure.
I see.
So yeah.
Well, so that's what's also so confusing about methylation. So methylation is actually a biochemical process that happens in the body outside of its relationship to cancer. But methylation is also involved in cancer and tumor progression. And so that's why it's actually methylation in general is a cycle that happens normally in the body, but there is a separate mechanism that methylation falls under with cancer as well. So that's why it can probably get confusing too.
Yes, for sure. It's confusing. That's why we need people like you to help us navigate this stuff.
Yeah. And then of course, not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but I know that there's tumor sequencing and MSI testing. And, that is another world of testing as well. So that's where it can get tricky. But just for the listeners, there's also something called somatic or tumor sequencing, which is a different type of genetic testing, which is offered. And that's actually what you were mentioning earlier when we were chatting, but it's when we test the tumor itself to see what the genetic makeup is of the tumor. And so it's different when we're doing germline, we say genetic testing, which means we're looking at the genes that you were born with, versus the tumor has its own genetic world. But oftentimes when you're born with a change, that change will be in the tumor, but not all changes in the tumor will be something you're born with. So that's the difference, is you'll be offered sometimes both, especially nowadays. And the best thing about tumor sequencing and somatic sequencing is also, again, precision medicine. It can really help clarify treatment options.
No, I'm so glad you said that, because as I had precision treatment based on my tumor mutations, and then because of my mom, I also ended up getting that germline testing. But when that first report came back, and this is, so new to me at that point, and I had thousands of mutations, I'm like, what is wrong with me? How am I even a functioning human? But it was like, your tumor has these mutations. It doesn't mean that this is you, and I think that differentiation is so helpful, because I was like, how am I even like a normal functioning human with all of these problems in my body? And it's like, no, it's just, you have a wild tumor.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's super helpful.
I was going to say lastly too, it's, if we think about it, a tumor in itself is just a clump of abnormal cells. And so abnormal cells have a lot of abnormal genetic mutations. And so that's why and that's not what you're born with. Again, like you said, it's always going to show up that way in a tumor, because the tumor is abnormal. So that it makes sense.
Right. And it's probably so obvious to you, but when this was all new to me, it was so overwhelming.
No, I can't imagine. If I didn't study this, I would be very confused. So I only said that so people can clarify it.
And outside of cancer, I just was like looking on your website to see what other stuff do people test for?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So genetic counselors are actually trained in so many different specialties. And so we're trained in anywhere from preconception to prenatal to pediatrics to adult, so there's a lot of different specialties. And And there isn't one genetic test that looks at everything. And so we have to, that's also why it's helpful to have specialties. But so when I'm doing testing, I oftentimes will cover cancer, but I also do testing for Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's risk. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, lifestyle genomics. And then we have another counselor who works with us who does preconception genetic testing and prenatal, which kind of overlap. I mean, a lot of these specialties overlap because if someone
Right.
is identified with a cancer mutation, sometimes they'll think about how that could impact them from a prenatal preconception standpoint, of course. So, and then she'll do pediatrics for children with autism and developmental delay. And then she'll also do pharmacogenomics, which is the study of how your DNA responds to medication, which is just another precision medicine tool, of
Wow.
course. So,
So
yeah,
is there
lots of
genetic testing for autism? I didn't even know that.
yeah. So we actually, and she is the expert on this, but we
That's
now
okay.
have discovered, no, yeah, but we know that we've now discovered that anywhere from 40 to 60 of autism cases do have a genetic component that can potentially be identified. And so she does do genetic testing. That's a pretty big panel because we want to try to look at as many genes as we can. It's called whole exome sequencing. But yeah, we can test for using that test for children with autism.
That's fascinating. And that's what I
Yeah.
told my kiddos because I have 4 kids, and so we know that I mean, there's all kinds of everyone has genetic stuff, right? Like we
Yeah.
know which one I have,
Yes.
and there's probably plenty more. And that
Yeah.
one can feel sort of scary, obviously. But it's like, first of all, you're not for sure going to get it because your mom had it. Second of all, even if
Yeah.
you have the mutation, it doesn't mean you're going to get cancer. Like you said, it
Yeah.
just reduces some of your body's
Yeah.
defenses towards certain
Yeah.
cancers. All this information is so new. And the
Yeah.
likelihood, even if you do get this cancer or any cancer 20 years from now, when you're like a middle-aged person in your 40s or whatever, 30 years from now, who knows what's going to be available
Yeah.
to help people.
I
So
know.
just the information, I think that alone makes it feel so much more
Mm.
empowering.
Yeah.
But even like I think about my grandmother who had dementia, and the brain is
Yeah.
so important to me because of obviously trying
Mm.
to keep my brain healthy after brain cancer, and then knowing that, and probably there's no relation between the two, but it's just so interesting now that you're seeing genetic connections between dementia or Alzheimer's. Um, that's amazing. So talk to me
Yeah.
about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And before I jump into that too, I just wanted
Sure.
to touch on I think you made such a good point that I also tell patients is that, well, 2 points. So one is that no one has a perfect genome. We actually have so much human diversity. And the way that genetics works in evolution is one gene may come up that causes an issue, but it protects against another issue that person was experiencing in that environment at the time. So it's like we have so many, different ways and mistakes, but also just different, part of human diversity, different changes in different genes all over. So I think that's such a good point is no one has a perfect genome. There's always something, but the amazing part is that we can figure out a lot of that and work with it. And then the second piece I was just going to say quickly too, is that I also really like to clarify that if someone does have a mutation in the family, you made such a good point, that doesn't mean that they will inherit it. And so a lot of times I think people are like, well, I'm not going to test because I already know there is a mutation and I have it. And it's actually like, well, you may actually not have it. And we call that a true negative if you test negative and we know there's a mutation in the family, which means that we actually know that your risk is, depending on your situation, mostly down to general population risk, and you don't have to go through those screenings. And so it's like, it's definitely helpful to know. Obviously, no one wants to do colonoscopy if they don't have to. So,
Right.
but I
Certainly
think,
not
yeah,
every
again,
year.
yeah. So, yeah, but, okay. So going to, dementia, Alzheimer's, this is, I think, such an interesting, and, honestly, genetic testing for this is also relatively new. It's also different than cancer genetic testing because cancer is something that is highly not preventable, but not always preventable, but also an ability to be proactive. Like we have so many screening and surgery options, whereas Alzheimer's and dementia works a little differently. So this information, has evolved over the years, and we've come to a point where we can offer this information, but the way that we're going to talk about it is different because we don't have, the same type of management.
Okay.
So I always just counsel people on that initially is like, this information can be really helpful from a lifestyle perspective. And it's just, we're not fully there to be able to do something like, be able to remove it, for instance. So it's just something to be more aware of and consider further before doing the testing. So we'll talk about that with people. Yeah. I was going to say too, yeah. But with that being said, I do really like to help people through understanding their results when they do testing. So the other piece is like, there's this gene called ApoE, which has been identified to increase risk of Alzheimer's. And, tests like 23andMe and Ancestry.com are offering testing. So, I think that I really like being able to clarify what this means for patients, because it can be really overwhelming if they do a test. Of course, 23andMe is banned right now, so we don't know what's going to happen with that. But if they do an ancestry test without meeting with someone first and find out they have an ApoE variant, that's kind of more what I was saying is like, I think it's really important to talk with someone in the genetic space before doing the test. But if you can't, it's especially important to talk with someone after, because, people can kind of go down the Google rabbit hole.
Right.
But ApoE is a gene that actually relates to lipid metabolism and cholesterol. And so we do offer the testing, and I actually think it's really helpful for people not only to clarify Alzheimer's risk and be preventative in that realm, but also for cholesterol levels. So clinically, when I am doing testing for patients, a majority of the time when someone has a certain variant that increases risk of Alzheimer's, they also have LDL and cholesterol issues because of the lipid metabolism role. And so that can be really helpful for us to understand how they can eat and what they can do to manage the cholesterol as well, because no one really thinks about that link. And of course, we want to make sure heart disease is not in the picture if we just think about Alzheimer's, but we want a lower risk of heart disease at the same time. So, but that's just one example. But yeah, we can get really specific, like with what gene we're talking about.
Wow. That's okay. So for instance, the ApoE, so you see that, and then it's like, okay, this is something that we can absolutely address with lifestyle changes. It will help your heart. It will help your general health if we just get that LDL cholesterol down. Which probably looks like a higher plant-based diet, less meat, less, of the bad fats or the unhealthy fats.
It's fascinating too. Like you said, I think the biggest thing is how can we adjust the LDL? And so we'll talk about like omega-3s and poly and mono unsaturated fats, olive, avocado oils versus butter, cheese, ice cream, right? Like the keto diet was really big and people were really pushing into the saturated fats. And it's like, if we don't know your genetics, then maybe that's actually really not helpful for you at all. And so but what's super interesting about that gene is some people have the opposite version of that gene where they actually have severely low LDL because of the processing, to the point where they have such low cholesterol that their hormones are impacted, because cholesterol is a precursor for hormones. So that's why it's so important. We're like, that's where like the diet comes into so much into play with genetics, because we're like, we don't want you to like follow a trendy diet when it's like distorting your body. So
okay, I need to grab onto two things here really quick. Okay, one being, I can't forget them. One being the keto, because I did do the keto for cancer, for the brain cancer thing, and there's a lot of science around that. It wasn't just a trendy thing, but theoretically, I know you haven't looked at my profile or anything, but theoretically, could that be more effective for somebody based on their specific genes to fight brain cancer or any cancer, or more dangerous for some people?
Good question. Yeah. And also, I totally fully agree with keto being really helpful for cancer as well. Should have said that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But like you said, I think it is still, we also have to get even more specific with keto, because like, I think what I saw happen was that people would go keto, but then they were eating a bunch of processed foods with saturated fats just to get their fat. And I was like, well, that's not actually healthy. So,
and I'm telling people that all the time. I started off because getting into ketosis is hard. And I definitely like had some hamburgers with like an egg on top and stuff. And then I was like, my God, it's not liking this. And everything fiber of my being is screaming, this is not good for you. So I did like a ketotarian. So I ate eggs and avocados and nuts and coconut oil and just really leaned into like the most plant-based keto I could do, which
Yeah.
felt like common sense wise a better idea
Yeah.
when you're trying to
Yeah.
fight cancer.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say that. It's like, it's not just keto or not keto. It's like, what
Yeah.
kind of keto are you doing? Are you drinking a
Yeah.
powder to get into ketosis? Are you eating a lot of saturated
Exactly.
fats? And are you
Exactly.
harming other parts of your body while you're helping? And yeah,
Exactly.
it's tricky.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is another one that's going to show that I'm not a science person, but this
So,
is fascinating to me. So I read like Lisa Mosconi's book, and I'm in that
yeah.
like mid to late 40s age now with a lot of my peers. So we're talking about different times of life, like perimenopause, menopause, and there's so much about Alzheimer's, dementia with estrogen. And so you said something about a hormonal precursor. Is that a different type of hormone in the body? Are we talking, or are we talking estrogen?
Oh, good question. So I think I was mentioning like cholesterol being the precursor for hormones. So how,
Yeah.
if that's off. So, but yeah, I think hormone balance is also just so important for so many. I think hormone balance is kind of brushed away, but it's so important for Alzheimer's, but I would say for just so many different reasons, because if you really, and of course I'm not a hormone expert, so I definitely refer to people who
Sure.
this is their expertise, but if you really look at it, from a perspective of like, if testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are imbalanced, it is going to cause a lot of issues in the body, which can in turn, create an environment for disease to show up. So I think it's fascinating. There are genes that we test for with hormones. I do say that with a grain of salt, like hormones are controlled so much by our environment and other things as well. But we will actually, in the genetic testing that I do, look at genes associated with hormone metabolism. So that would be like the CYP genes, which help us understand how you process phase one detoxification. So how you're processing estrogen, for example, and getting it out of your body. And some people can't get it out of their body, so they're estrogen dominant. So we can look at some of these genetic components and really help clarify that too.
Wow. It's so fascinating. This whole field is so
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's only expanding, and it's the genetic testing world has exploded. And so it is so amazing to be in, kind of the midst of it, and being able to watch the new research and watch what we're learning about it all the time. And like you said, I think that's the other thing you made is such a good point too. Like with Alzheimer's, for instance, that's a big thing about testing as well that I'll tell patients is like clinical trials are available as well. And also research is just expanding so quickly. So if you know that you have a genetic component, like if something comes up, you'll know what to do and how to, what treatment or what management to go on in the future. That's super personalized to you. So it's just, always new research every day.
Is there anything else you just kind of want to share or with everyone
Um,
listening?
Let's see. Well, the other thing too that I just was going to mention quickly about dementia and Alzheimer's testing
Yeah.
is the dementia umbrella. So when we're thinking about genetic testing too for dementia, it's not just about ApoE, which is more related to Alzheimer's specifically. But when we're looking at the umbrella under dementia, there are other subtypes like frontal temporal dementia, vascular dementia, different subtypes of dementia. So the genetic testing for dementias in general can also be really helpful, especially if a parent or someone is impacted currently, because it can really help clarify, because the specific type of dementia is pretty hard to diagnose. And so we can get clarity through genetics, which can help with treatment and management, but also prevention strategies as well.
My favorite thing that you said is no one has a perfect genome.
Yeah.
Right? Is that right?
Yeah, I always tell my patients that. Yeah.
Yeah. And like perfect, what is perfect, right? Like you said,
Exactly.
it's evolved to face different things in our environment or whatever
Yeah.
else. So that just, I don't know, that's a good takeaway for me.
Totally. Yeah. I think I loved studying evolutionary genetics, because you also understand that as a population evolved in different places, our bodies just adapted to the environment. So like people have heard of sickle cell anemia being more common in African American individuals, and that's because the certain variant protects them against malaria. And we know that malaria was, obviously is present in Africa. And so it's like the body's just trying to help the person at the certain point in time. And so it's, I always like to say, like, what you're born with, it's no one's fault. And the body, there's a reason that, that happened. And the best part of it is that we now have the tools to uncover it and learn how we can work with it.
That's so perfectly said. I love that. I just love to end on that positive note and just,
Yeah.
That's
Well,
great.
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it was so great talking with you. And I just like to mention too, if anyone has any genetics questions, I'm always available. I'm always, I always available to talk more. Even if I can't help, I'll find someone who can, because I think it's such good information and can be confusing. So feel free to reach out.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. You are such an amazing resource. And I'm so excited for the future of golden genetics and this field in general. Thank you so much, Natalie. It was such a pleasure having you on the Brainy Blonde podcast. And thank you guys for listening today. I hope that you feel better after listening to this episode. I know I do. I feel like I learned so much. I feel better equipped, better informed. I know there are resources out there. There's Natalie, people you can talk to help you navigate this stuff so you don't have to just get online and start searching and scare yourself. And I love when she said there is no perfect genome. Of course there isn't. What's perfect and wonderful and beautiful about us is we're all unique. But the more we know ourselves, the better we will be equipped to face whatever comes our way. Please share this episode with someone you love and have a great day. Let me know what you think.